The gavel slammed down, its sharp crack echoing through the silent courtroom. My mother stared at me from across the room, her face a perfect mask of disbelief. Her mouth was slightly agape, and her eyes, which had been filled with a smug certainty just moments before, were now wide with confusion and shock. My father sat beside her, looking deflated like a balloon that had been pricked. And my brother, David, the golden child, just shook his head slowly, refusing to meet my gaze. They couldn't understand how they had lost. They had been so sure, so utterly convinced that their performance of grief and entitlement would win the day. They didn't realize the lawsuit demanding my dead wife's $1 million life insurance policy was the best weapon they could have ever handed me. The judge adjusted his glasses and looked down at them with an expression of pure contempt. He wasn't just dismissing their case, he was eviscerating it, calling their claim frivolous, malicious, and an abuse of the court's time. My family, who had paraded themselves as victims, were now being publicly condemned as vultures. They had come here expecting a windfall, a final victory over the son they had always treated as a footnote in their lives. Instead, their greed was being laid bare for the world to see, under the cold, unforgiving lights of the law. They had wanted the money my wife, Sarah, had left for me. Instead, they were about to get a bill for my legal fees and a reputation that would follow them to their graves. You might wonder how a family gets to a place where they sue their own son and brother for his deceased wife's insurance money. To understand that, you have to understand the foundation of our family, a hierarchy built on lies, favoritism, and my designated role as the perpetual scapegoat. To say I grew up in my brother's shadow would be an understatement. I grew up in the dirt his shadow was cast upon. David was the sun around which my parents orbited. He was the golden child, the one destined for greatness, the one whose every whim was a command. His grades, which were merely average, were framed and celebrated. His mediocre performance on the high school football team was spoken of in hushed, reverent tones, as if he were a future Hall of Famer. When he wanted a car for his 16th birthday, my parents took out a second mortgage to buy him a brand new convertible. When he decided to go to a private out-of-state university, they drained their savings to pay for his tuition, his dorm, and his spring break trips to Cancun. I, on the other hand, was the afterthought, the quiet, responsible one. My straight A's went unnoticed. My part-time job, which I started at 15 to save for a car, was seen not as a sign of ambition, but as a given. "Mark knows how to handle things," my father would say with a dismissive wave. It wasn't a compliment, it was an abdication of responsibility. While David was having his future handed to him on a silver platter, I was told to apply for scholarships and student loans. I worked 2 jobs throughout college to make ends meet, living in a cramped apartment with 3 other guys while David enjoyed a cushy, parent-funded life. The injustice was so blatant, so woven into the fabric of our daily lives, that protesting it felt like trying to argue with the tide. They simply couldn't see it, or rather they refused to. David needed their help, I apparently did not. This narrative was their gospel, and they preached it relentlessly. Then I met Sarah. She was like a force of nature, a whirlwind of laughter, intelligence, and kindness that swept into my life and rearranged everything for the better. We met in a dusty university library, both of us cramming for finals. I was running on caffeine and 3 hours of sleep. She was calm, organized, and had a smile that could light up the darkest corners of that old building. For the first time, someone saw me. Not David's brother, not the quiet, self-sufficient son, but just me. She saw my ambition, my exhaustion, my quiet resentment, and she didn't dismiss it. She validated it. My family, predictably, was less than enthused. To them, Sarah was an outsider who didn't understand their special dynamic. When I first brought her home for a holiday dinner, my mother greeted her with a smile as thin as a razor blade. She spent the entire evening regaling Sarah with stories of David's latest achievements. A promotion at his entry-level marketing job was spoken of as if he'd been named CEO. They barely asked Sarah about her own life, her career as a brilliant pediatric nurse, or her passions. It was clear they saw her as an accessory to me, and since I was barely a blip on their radar, she was even less significant. Sarah saw it all immediately. On the drive home that night, she took my hand and said, "They don't see you, do they? It's like you're invisible to them." Hearing her say it out loud, so plainly and without judgment, was like a dam breaking inside me. All the years of frustration and hurt I had swallowed down came pouring out. She just listened, nodding, her thumb rubbing gentle circles on the back of my hand. She never told me to cut them off, but she did teach me how to build a wall. With her by my side, I learned to create distance, to stop seeking their approval, and to build a life that was entirely our own, separate from the toxic ecosystem I had grown up in. Our home became my sanctuary, and she was its heart. We had 10 beautiful years together. 10 years of building our world, just the two of us. We bought a small house, adopted a scruffy dog, and filled our lives with quiet joys. My relationship with my family settled into a kind of distant, low-level hum. We saw them on holidays, exchanged pleasantries, and I learned to let their passive-aggressive comments about my life choices roll off my back. With Sarah beside me, their opinions were nothing more than meaningless noise. Our happiness was our shield. Then the shield shattered. It started with a cough that wouldn't go away, then a crushing fatigue. Doctor's appointments turned into specialist visits, which turned into hushed, serious conversations in sterile white rooms. Aggressive lung cancer. Inoperable. 6 months, they said. We got 4. Those 4 months were a blur of hospital beds, chemotherapy, and moments of gut-wrenching clarity. We said everything that needed to be said. We held hands until her knuckles were white. I watched the love of my life, the vibrant woman who had saved me from my own family, fade away until she was just a whisper of herself. When she died, it felt like the sun had been permanently extinguished from the sky. The world didn't just go gray, it went black. My family's response was exactly what Sarah would have predicted. They showed up at the funeral wearing somber faces and offered hollow condolences. "She was such a sweet girl," my mother said, patting my arm awkwardly. They had barely known her. My brother, David, clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hang in there, man. Let us know if you need anything." But their eyes were distant, already moving on. They stayed for less than an hour at the reception before announcing they had to leave. David had a golf game he couldn't miss. In the raw, gaping wound of my grief, their indifference was like salt. They weren't there to support me. They were there to make an appearance, to check a box. A week after the funeral, my father called. I thought for a fleeting moment that he was checking in on me. I was wrong. After a few perfunctory questions, he got to the real point. "So, Mark," he began, his voice taking on a business-like tone. "Sarah was a practical woman. I'm sure you two had things in order. You'll be okay financially, right? She must have had a good life insurance policy." I was too numb to be angry. The question was so crass, so devoid of empathy, that it barely registered through the thick fog of my grief. "Yes, Dad," I said, my voice flat and tired. "We had a policy. We took it out when we bought the house. It's for $1 million. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head over the phone line. $1 million. The number hung in the air between us, heavy and obscene. He mumbled something about that being a good thing and quickly ended the call. I didn't think much of it at the time. I hung up the phone and went back to staring at the empty space on the pillow next to me. But that phone call was the beginning. It was like a signal had been sent out. Suddenly, my family was constantly present. My mother started showing up at my house unannounced, carrying Tupperware containers of bland casseroles I never ate. She'd bustle around my kitchen, tidying things that didn't need tidying, her eyes scanning everything, taking inventory. "This is too big a house for just one person," she'd say with a sigh. "All these memories, it must be so hard for you." Her sympathy felt as fake as a $3 bill. David started calling me, inviting me out for drinks, something he hadn't done in 10 years. He'd talk about his financial struggles, the mortgage, his car payments, the cost of his kids' private school. He'd frame it as just venting, but the implication was clear. They started dropping Sarah's name into conversations with a new, unsettling familiarity. "Sarah would have wanted you to be happy." "Mark," my mother would say, "and she'd want to know the family is secure." They were building a narrative, brick by painful brick, in which Sarah's love for me was transferable to them, and by extension, so was her money. They were posthumously adopting her into the family she'd wanted nothing to do with, all to stake a claim on what she had left me. The initial shock of their callousness began to harden into a cold, sickening realization. They weren't mourning with me. They were circling. This wasn't about my well-being. It was about the $1 million sitting in an insurance company's account with my name on it, and they were getting ready to pounce. The official summons came a week later. My mother called, her voice low and serious. "Mark, we need to talk. As a family, your father David and I are worried about you, and we think we have a solution that will help everyone. Can you come over for dinner on Sunday?" It wasn't a request. The tone was one of a CEO calling a mandatory meeting. I knew exactly what was coming. The vultures were done circling. They were ready to land and feast, but I knew I had to see it through. I had to hear them say it to my face. I walked into my parents' house, and the air was thick with a tense, theatrical solemnity. They were all sitting in the living room, arranged on the sofas like a panel of judges. My father gestured for me to sit in the single armchair opposite them. It felt like an interrogation. He cleared his throat and started with the expected platitudes. He spoke of family, of loyalty, of how they had always supported both their sons. I almost laughed out loud at the revisionist history. Then he got to the point. "Mark, that insurance money, it's a life-changing amount," he said, leaning forward. "And we, as a family, have decided on the fairest way to handle it. You're alone now. Your needs are simple. David, on the other hand, has a wife and 2 children, a mortgage, a future to build. We've supported him, yes, but we're not made of money. The $1 million should come to us. We will use it to pay off our mortgage, secure our retirement, and give David the financial security he needs to provide for his family. You can keep the house, of course. We think this is the most equitable solution." I just stared at them, speechless. They weren't asking for a piece of it. They wanted all of it. They had sat there, deliberated, and decided to disinherit me from my own wife's legacy. It was my brother, David, who delivered the final devastating blow. He leaned back on the couch, looking smug. "He's right, Mark. Be realistic. What are you going to do with $1 million? It's not like you have a family to spend it on anymore." That was it. The line. He didn't just want the money. He was using Sarah's death as his primary justification for taking it. In that moment, something inside me broke. And something else, something cold and hard as steel, formed in its place. The grief was gone, burned away by the white-hot fire of their greed. I looked at the 3 of them, these strangers who shared my blood, and felt nothing but contempt. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "The answer is no." I stood up and walked out the door without another word, their shocked and angry faces fading behind me. As I drove away, a plan began to form. I wasn't just going to say no. I was going to make them pay for ever asking. I knew they wouldn't let it go. My single-word refusal was not an end to the conversation. It was a declaration of war. The next morning, I downloaded a call recording app onto my phone. It felt cloak and dagger, something out of a spy movie, but I knew I was going to need it. Every interaction from that point forward had to be documented. I was no longer dealing with family. I was dealing with adversaries who had just revealed the depths of their depravity. I had to be prepared. It didn't take long. My phone started blowing up with a barrage of texts and calls. David called me a selfish bastard. My father left a long, rambling voicemail about how I was disrespecting his authority as the head of the family. But the call I was waiting for, the one I knew would be the centerpiece of my evidence, came from my mother. When I saw her name on the screen, I took a deep breath, hit the record button, and answered. "Mark, I am so disappointed in you," she began, her voice dripping with venom. There was no pretense of concern now, only raw, unfiltered fury. "After everything we've done for you?" "What have you done for me, Mom?" I asked, my voice level and calm. The question seemed to stun her for a second. "We raised you. We gave you a home. And this is how you repay us? By hoarding money that should be used for your family? David is struggling." "Do you even care?" "It's Sarah's money," I stated simply. "The beneficiary is me. That was her choice." "Sarah is gone," she shrieked, and I could hear her voice cracking with rage, not sorrow. This was the moment I was waiting for. "She's gone, Mark. What matters now is the living. What matters is your real family. Do you think she would want you to be a lonely, bitter man sitting on a pile of cash while your own brother can't afford a decent vacation for his kids? You don't deserve it. That money is for us." It was all there. The breathtaking entitlement, the dismissal of Sarah's memory, the explicit statement that I didn't deserve what my own wife left me. It was more perfect than I could have scripted. I let her scream for another minute before ending the call. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a strange, vindicating thrill. I saved the audio file, renaming it Evidence. I had the proof. Now, all I had to do was wait for them to make their next move. I had a strong suspicion it would involve a lawyer. Their next move was more insidious than a direct confrontation. They launched a smear campaign. They started calling extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't spoken to in years, and feeding them a carefully crafted story. In their version of events, I was the villain. I was the cold-hearted son, who, after his wife's tragic passing, had come into a fortune and refused to help his struggling family. They painted a picture of themselves as worried parents, desperate to save their son from his own grief-stricken greed. They called the insurance policy family money that I was hoarding. The most painful part was that some of them believed it. I got a few calls from well-meaning relatives, gently suggesting I should do the right thing for my parents and brother. My isolation was now nearly complete, but it only strengthened my resolve. They were salting the earth of my entire life, and for that, there had to be a reckoning. About a month after the phone call with my mother, the official declaration of war arrived in my mailbox. It was a thick envelope with the letterhead of a law firm I'd never heard of. My hands were steady as I opened it. Inside, formal legal language laid out their insane demands. They were suing me for the full $1 million. Their claim was a work of pure fiction. They alleged that Sarah had made a verbal promise to them, ensuring they would be financially supported for the rest of their lives. They claimed that the insurance policy was purchased with this specific family obligation in mind. Even more disgustingly, they alleged that I had exerted undue influence over my wife in her final days, manipulating her to keep me as the sole beneficiary against her true wishes. They were not only trying to steal her money, but they were also desecrating her memory by painting her as a puppet and me as her puppeteer. A cold smile touched my lips. It was even more perfect than I'd imagined. They were building their entire case on a foundation of lies. The next day, I found the best litigation lawyer in the city. He was a sharp, expensive man in his 50s with eyes that seemed to see right through you. I laid out the facts for him. My wife's passing, the insurance policy, my family's sudden interest in my finances, and the lawsuit. I gave him the timeline and the details of their claims. He listened intently, nodding slowly. "Their case is built on hearsay and emotional appeals. It's weak," he said finally. "But they'll be vicious." I nodded. "I know." There was one crucial detail I left out. I never mentioned the recording. I wanted to let them walk into that courtroom, place their hands on the Bible, and perjure themselves into oblivion. The months leading up to the trial were a special kind of hell. We went through discoveries and depositions. I had to sit in a sterile conference room and listen as my mother, father, and brother, one by one, swore an oath and then proceeded to lie for hours. They had rehearsed their story until it was seamless. They spoke of conversations with Sarah that never happened, of promises she never made. My mother cried on cue, dabbing her eyes with a tissue as she described how Sarah had supposedly pulled her aside and said, "Please look after Mark and the family if anything happens to me." David described my relationship with Sarah as strained in her final months, a vile lie designed to support their claim of undue influence. Listening to them systematically dismantle the truth of my life with Sarah was like being flayed alive, one strip of skin at a time. My own lawyer was growing concerned. He was a brilliant man, but he could only work with the facts I'd given him. "Mark, this is turning into a messy," he said. "She said," he told me after one particularly grueling deposition. They're presenting a united and, unfortunately, somewhat sympathetic front. An elderly couple and their devoted son against the grieving widower. A jury could eat that up. "Have you considered a settlement? We could offer them a fraction, maybe 50,000, just to make this nightmare end." "No," I said, my voice harder than I intended. "Absolutely not. We are not settling. We are not giving them $1. We are going to trial." He looked at me, a flicker of frustration in his eyes. He thought I was being stubborn, letting my emotions cloud my judgment. He didn't understand that my judgment had never been clearer. I was letting them build their own gallows. I needed them to stand up in a public courtroom, in front of a judge, and repeat those same lies. I needed their arrogance to reach its absolute peak before I brought it all crashing down. The night before the trial was set to begin, I called my lawyer to my house. I sat him down in the living room where Sarah and I had spent so many happy evenings. "There's something I need you to hear," I said. I took out my phone, found the file labeled Evidence, and pressed play. My mother's furious, screeching voice filled the quiet room. "Sarah is gone. She's gone, Mark. What matters now is the living. You don't deserve it. That money is for us." When it finished, I looked at my lawyer. His face was a stone mask of shock. The shock slowly melted away, replaced by a slow, wolfish grin. He looked at me with newfound respect, a hint of awe in his eyes. "You magnificent bastard," he whispered. "You let them walk right into it." The next morning we walked into the courthouse. The air was sterile and tense. My family was already there, sitting with their lawyer. My mother was dressed in a conservative gray dress, a picture of quiet maternal suffering. David had on his best suit, looking serious and responsible. They gave me a look of pitying contempt, as if I were a foolish child who had let things go too far. They had no idea they were the ones who had walked into a trap. My lawyer and I took our seats, and I felt a strange sense of calm. The board was set, the pieces were in place. All that was left was for them to make their final, fatal moves. Their lawyer began, and my mother was his first witness. She walked to the stand, swore her oath on the Bible without a hint of irony, and began her performance. It was masterful. Her voice trembled as she recounted the fictional stories of her deep, loving bond with Sarah. She told the court how Sarah, her dearest daughter-in-law, had worried constantly about the family's well-being. Tears welled in her eyes as she delivered the centerpiece of her lie, the supposed promise from Sarah to take care of them. She knew David was the foundation of the family, my mother wept, dabbing her eyes. She wanted her legacy to strengthen that foundation, not to be squandered. My lawyer began his cross-examination gently. He was calm, almost deferential. "So, to be clear, ma'am, you are testifying under penalty of perjury that your daughter-in-law, Sarah, explicitly told you that her life insurance was intended for you and your son, David." "Yes," my mother said, lifting her chin defiantly. "That is what she wanted." And you believe your son Mark, her husband of 10 years, does not deserve this money? In his state, he can't manage it. It's not about deserving, she said, the lie smooth as silk. It's about what's best for the family as a whole. David was next. He backed up every word she said. He spoke of my instability after Sarah's death and painted me as an irrational man, isolated and angry. He repeated the lie that our marriage had been difficult at the end. When my lawyer cross-examined him, he was smug and unshakable. He confirmed the entire fabricated story. When he stepped down from the stand, my family exchanged a subtle, triumphant glance. Their story was told. It was cohesive and emotional. They believed they had won. They sat back, waiting for the judge to validate their greed. They had no idea that my lawyer was just getting warmed up. The defense calls no witnesses at this time, my lawyer announced, his voice ringing with authority. A murmur went through the courtroom. My family's lawyer looked confused. My mother and David exchanged a smug look, assuming this meant we had no case. They thought I was too broken to even testify on my own behalf. Instead, Your Honor, my lawyer continued, turning to face the judge, we would like to present a piece of evidence for impeachment, a piece of evidence that directly refutes the testimony given under oath by Mrs. Last Name. My family's lawyer shot to his feet. Objection. The defense has shared no such evidence during discovery. It is being submitted purely to challenge the credibility of the plaintiff, Your Honor, my lawyer countered smoothly. Its relevance as impeachment evidence was only cemented after hearing her sworn testimony today. The judge leaned forward, his eyes narrowed with interest. He looked from my lawyer to my mother's terrified face, then back again. Objection overruled. I want to hear this. Proceed. A slow, triumphant smile spread across my lawyer's face. He walked to the defense table, picked up a small digital audio player, and placed it before the court clerk. This is a recording of a phone call made to my client by his mother on October 12th, 3 days after she claims to have had a civil, loving discussion about Sarah's supposed wishes. He pressed a button. The first sound was my own calm voice. Then my mother's voice, shrill and full of rage, filled the silent courtroom. It was the complete opposite of the gentle, grieving woman who had wept on the stand moments before. The judge's eyes widened. My father sank lower in his chair. David's jaw went slack. They all recognized the voice. They recognized the hate. And then came the final damning lines, echoing in the dead quiet of the room. Sarah is gone. She's gone, Mark. What matters now is the living. What matters is your real family. You don't deserve it. That money is for us. The recording ended. The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier and more damning than any testimony could ever be. Every person in that room had heard the raw, unvarnished truth. The mask was not just removed, it was shattered into a million pieces. I looked over at my family. My mother's face was ashen, a mask of pure horror. My brother was staring at her, his face a mixture of shock and betrayal, as if even he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Their meticulously constructed tower of lies had just been leveled by a single, undeniable truth. And the judge was staring at them with an expression of such profound disgust that I knew it was all over. The judge took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, letting the silence hang in the air for a few moments longer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, controlled, and laced with ice. In all my years on the bench, he began, looking directly at my mother, father, and brother, I have rarely witnessed a performance of such breathtaking avarice and cruelty. You have come into this courtroom and, under oath, constructed a narrative of lies designed not only to steal from your own son and brother, but to desecrate the memory of his deceased wife. He picked up the gavel but didn't use it yet. You are not victims. You are predators. You saw a tragedy not as a time for comfort and support, but as a financial opportunity. He looked at their lawyer. And you, counselor, should be ashamed for entertaining this farce. Then his eyes settled back on my family. The plaintiff's case is dismissed with extreme prejudice. Furthermore, I am ordering the plaintiffs to pay the entirety of the defendant's legal costs. This court will not be used as a weapon for familial extortion." He finally raised the gavel. "And let the record show that I am forwarding the transcript of this entire proceeding to the district attorney's office for review on charges of perjury. This hearing is adjourned." The gavel slammed down. That was the crack that brought me back to where the story began. My family sat frozen, the judge's words hanging over them like a death sentence. Their grab for $1 million had left them publicly humiliated, financially ruined by my legal fees, and facing a potential criminal investigation. As they shuffled out of the courtroom, they were utterly broken. The relatives they had lied to would soon hear the news. The community they cared so much about would know the truth. Their golden child was tarnished beyond repair. I walked out into the sunlight, feeling not elation, but a profound sense of quiet. The weight I had carried my entire life, the weight of being the lesser son, the scapegoat, the disappointment, was gone. I was finally free. The insurance money was never the point. It was a symbol of Sarah's love and foresight, and I would honor it. I used every penny to establish the Sarah Collins Foundation, a charity dedicated to providing financial support to families dealing with the hidden costs of cancer treatment. It was a tribute to her kindness, a legacy of love built from the ashes of greed. My family tried to destroy me, but in the end they only succeeded in destroying themselves.